Hello, this is Mark Sabatella from the Mastering MuseScore School. In this lesson, I want to show you a little bit of a technique. The general technique is something we call model composition, and it's the idea of taking ideas from an existing composition and applying it to creating your own music. So the piece that we're going to look at here is a composition by the jazz pianist Bill Evans entitled My Bells. And this is, I have a published transcription I had obtained at one point, and I entered it into MuseScore, and for reasons that have to do with what I'm eventually going to do, I transposed it into G. The original key was actually B. So I've transposed it to G, and actually I say that, but you don't see a key signature here. That's because it changes key throughout the course of the composition. But I'm going to play you first this. And this, Bill Evans played it almost exactly note for note this way, as essentially a solo piano piece. So that is the basic composition to this piece, My Bells. And then he does improvisation around a chord progression based on this one, and there's some other aspects to the full performance. But this is the basic composition. And this is what I wanted to take and do some of my own things with this idea. This came about when I was working on my composition degree, studying with a pianist, Eric Gunnison, and we kind of were working out some of the ideas from here. And so when I talk about specific techniques, there's really two that I want to focus on. One is this voicing. This voicing that's happening in the piano, it's all piano, right? But the right hand has a triad. In this case, the very first triad appears to be an E minor triad. Top down, it's E, and then B, and then G, right? A first inversion E minor triad. The G, the third, is in the bass. And then in the left hand, there's two notes a fourth apart. In this case, it's actually an augmented fourth from C to F sharp. That's because that's in the key. Everything about this piece through these first 4-6 measures is completely diatonic, completely nothing but notes from G major. So it's a shape that involves a first inversion triad in the right hand, and then a left hand, two notes a fourth apart, and they're kind of butting up against each other, right? This F sharp here is just a step below the G. So the F sharp, the top note of the left hand, is a step below G, the bottom note of the right hand. That's a particular interesting voicing shape. I'm not saying Bill Evans invented that shape and no one had ever used it before, but he really built a lot around that. And if you pay attention here, right, that's all that shape moving around in parallel. The next chord we see appears to be a C triad in first inversion again, with the third on the bottom, and then a step below that is the D, the top note of what's in the left hand, and then a fourth below that to the A. So it's this first inversion triad in the right, a fourth in the left, and then a step between the hands. And he's just moving that shape kind of throughout the scale. And, he does some other things voice leading wise, resolving some of the notes like that E eventually resolves to D in that last measure. But he's making a lot of use out of that specific shape. And even when he builds bigger shapes, this is a bigger shape, right? Instead of 5 notes, it's 6, but it's that same idea. First inversion triad in the right hand, in this case with a melody on top, so it's really more than just 6 notes. It's 8 notes, including the melody and the bass. But the moving part here is that first inversion triad in the right hand, and then in the left hand, a step below. So we have F sharp as our lowest note, a step below that is E, and that's the top note in my left hand, and then a fourth below that is B. So that's that same shape, but he's just added another note to it to actually complete a second first inversion triad in the left hand. So the right hand has a D triad in first inversion. The right hand had the D triad. The left hand has an E minor triad, and they're a step apart. The E that's at the top on the left hand is just a step below the F sharp that's on the bottom of the right hand, and then he moves that shape in parallel. So it's a really interesting sound. Here he thins out that sound. In that passage, now he's gone from the original 5-note version of it to a 4-note version of it, right? It's only 4 notes here, and he did that. It's a similar type of shape. We've got a first inversion triad in the right hand, but the left hand note is actually a fourth below the bottom note of the right hand. And so and then he moves that shape around. So it's a related kind of sound that he's playing with. So I wanted to take that idea of taking that specific voicing shape and using it to kind of move around diatonically on each note of my melody, and I want to take another song to apply that to. So what I did was I took the song Soon It's Gonna Rain from the Fantasticks, and the melody here is the melody, and I took exactly that same shape. It's that same first inversion triad in the right hand, and then in my left hand it's a fourth, and the bottom note of my right hand is an A, the top note of my left hand is a G, and then below that G I've got my fourth down to D. So I've got that exact same shape that I am moving around the melody. In this case, I have it in the key of F. Again, not with a key signature because my final arrangement changes key, and I didn't think it was worthwhile. But here is then Soon It's Gonna Rain melody with that exact same voicing technique. So when you hear that much, you're hearing all of the same things, right? It's that same exact 5-note voicing moved around with that melody. I didn't write that melody. That is the melody to Soon It's Gonna Rain. And I'm not sure actually how I ended up choosing that one, but it has a lot of the same character, right? It's quarter notes with a few eighth notes. Da 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 dum da da dum da 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 dum. That's mostly quarter notes with a few half notes and a few eighth notes. And so Soon It's Gonna Rain is kind of a similar character, mostly quarter notes, a few eighth notes, a couple half notes. And I don't know, I just thought it would make a good, and it's diatonic, as a lot of melodies are, and it works really well that way. And then, so the first phrase is literally that 5-note voicing, and then the last measure, so the first measure, for instance, is that original 5-note voicing, and then at the end of the phrase, I put in the 6-note version, where I complete the triad in the left hand. And then for the next phrase, I decided to move to the other shape, the 4-note shape. Right? In that phrase, it's the 4-note shape, where it's just the triad in the right hand and then a single note, a fourth below that bottom note in the left hand. So I'm just using those two Bill Evans shapes. And then for the last measure of the passage, I'm using the big 6-note version, but in this case with the bass note also. So I've got a 7-note texture. Bill Evans actually, remember, had an 8-note texture because he had not only the bass note, but also a melody note, an F sharp, sitting on top of the whole structure. So that is how I took that idea and applied it to what's called the verse of Soon It's Gonna Rain. It's the introductory melody that you hear at the beginning and then don't really hear again. The main part of the song Soon It's Gonna Rain is the part that we would call the chorus. And this, I'll play it for you first, then show you how I took these techniques from my bells. So in this passage, it's obviously a different technique, right? But it's the technique that Bill Evans is using in the next phrase of My Bells. Right? That's very obviously related. Again, what's happening is we have a melody. Let's look at My Bells first. We have a melody that's essentially quarter note based. Ba-da-da-da, ba-do-dum, 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 ba-do-dum. It's mostly quarter notes, some eighth notes, some half notes. Yeah, maybe it's almost equally distributed there. But then underneath that, he has these moving eighth note lines. Right? Oops, it changed voices there, but right? So it's got these moving eighth note lines, but not just moving eighth note lines. They're moving in pairs. So it's usually one note in the left hand that's moving at the same time as the right hand. So here, the right hand is going A, B, D, C, B, A, while the left hand is going C, D, C, D, F sharp, E, D, C, right? These are a sixth apart. A in the right hand, C in the left hand are a sixth apart. So they're parallel sixths that are moving. And then that texture changes in the next measure to parallel tenths. The line goes D, C, B, A in the right hand, and B, A, G, F sharp in the left, a tenth apart. Parallel sixths and parallel thirds, or in this case tenths because they're separated by an octave. That's a really common technique in general to have parallel thirds and parallel tenths, but Bill Evans is using it for in a specific context here as like inner voice leading in a constant stream of eighth notes, right? Those eighth notes do not stop from here until there. That's like 4 measures of just a steady diet of parallel sixths, parallel tenths, or in this little passage where they're actually parallel thirds, both in the right hand. So that idea of keeping this steady stream of running eighth notes behind the melody, because the melody is just the ba-da-da-da, ba-do-dum. It's got a couple eighth notes, but it's mostly the quarter notes and the half notes. So I wanted to take that technique, and again, it's all pretty diatonic until you get to in these last few beats, we've got some accidentals, some notes that aren't just in the key of G, right? Again, the accidentals that we're seeing in the first few measures are just the F sharps that come from the key of G. So let's jump down to where I do that again with Soon It's Gonna Rain, and in this case it's in B flat. Right? I have that same steady stream of eighth notes. And again, sometimes they're in tenths, like between this B flat and that G, A to F, right? And sometimes they're in thirds, like this D to B, E to C, and so forth. So sometimes they're in thirds, and sometimes maybe I have them in sixths. I do have them in sixths in a few places, like at the very beginning, when the melody is just da-da-da-da-dum. The moving line is G in the right hand against B flat in the left. So G, A, C, B flat in the right, and B flat, C, E, D in the left. And I'm singing these all the wrong octave, but in the octaves that they're actually in, the G in the right hand is a sixth above that B flat. So I'm using the parallel sixths there, as well as the tenths, as well as the thirds. And furthermore, there's a few other things that are kind of specifically going on that help connect it. And if you look again at the original, the melody has a repeated note, right? G, 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 E. And the moving stuff is all what's called oblique motion while that note stays constant. And mine has the same thing going on because the melody also has that constant note. Again, I'm not sure what made me choose this piece, but it was really kind of perfect because it allowed for exactly that. It allowed me to have that constant note there while the constant da 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 dum, the constant F in the melody, while the moving lines moved underneath that in oblique motion. So it's a very similar type of melody, and so it lent itself to that same approach. And then the last thing that I will point out about this is what's going on harmonically here. There's all sorts of places. This is a D7 chord, and one of the melody notes is B. Or not the melody notes, one of the moving lines is a B, which is the 13th, then resolving, or moving, I should say, to B flat, which is the flat 13, still on the D chord. Then the chord changes to G. That B flat, the flat 13, moves to A, so it's moving by step, but A is now the 9th of this G chord. And we get that kind of motion also on that same G chord. We get again E, the 13th, moving to E flat, the flat 13th, and then moving to D, which is the 9th of the C chord. So those sorts of chromatic motions that involve connecting 9ths and 13ths, that's kind of a big part of the jazz language in general, not just Bill Evans. So just like Bill Evans didn't necessarily invent that voicing I showed you, nor did he invent parallel thirds or invent parallel sixths. He didn't invent 13s moving to flat 13s moving to ninths, but it's doing so insistently, saying, you know what, I'm going to have these moving eighth notes that are going to just keep going, ninths and flat 13s, and just connecting like that as part of this phrase. And so I wanted to adopt that idea in my piece, and so I have that sort of thing happening, like here I have my F7 chord, and G is the 9th, and it goes to a flat 9 there. I have it spelt F sharp. I have it spelt as, not as flat 9. It really should have been spelt G flat, but it's going to resolve back up to G. That's why I spelt it F sharp, because it's resolving upwards. But so I'm using a lot of those same techniques. Here's the G7, and again I have the 13th E resolving to the flat 13, E flat. In this case, I'm using quarter notes instead of eighth notes, and that's because the chord lasts for 2 beats. Bill Evans used it on a chord that only lasted a single beat, right? And so his E to E flat were eighth notes. Mine were quarter notes because I had 2 beats to kill. So I'm using all those same techniques to create my version of Soon It's Gonna Rain, using that specific 5-note parallel motion voicing, the expanded 6-note version, the simplified 4-note version, and then the 6-note version plus bass. Right? And then I'm using all those running eighth notes in parallel sixths, parallel tenths, and parallel thirds. And then I'm also using things like those chromatic motions between the 13ths and flat 13s and 9s and flat 9s. Again, here I've got a D is the 9th of that C chord, moving to D flat, the flat 9. All the same kinds of techniques that Bill Evans is using, so that I'm able to take a completely different song, Soon It's Gonna Rain, but arrange it using techniques that came directly from Bill Evans' My Bells. And that's the kind of thing we mean by model composition. Sometimes it's like this, where we're taking a really specific technique and applying it to how we arrange a melody. Sometimes it's a bigger picture thing. We're talking about the overall form, the way the introduction leads to this next section, which leads to this next section, which leads to this next section, and you copy that overall form. There's different aspects. You copy what you want to copy. In this case, it was the voicings and the way Bill Evans used those moving lines and chromatic resolutions. That's what I wanted to copy, and this is what I came up with. So it's an interesting challenge to try, and I encourage you to find a piece that you enjoy, figure out what's going on in it that you like, and see if you can apply that either to another song like I did, or just totally write your own music. It could be your own original melody, or it could be something like this where you take a melody that seems like it might work. And as I said, I think I got lucky because I don't think I was smart enough to predict in advance how well this melody was going to fit this technique. But I think it worked pretty well. So good luck in your own efforts to do something like this.